Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar From Cookie Cutter to Purpose Built. As the NWBA and Sportable gear up to co-host the 2024 Adult and Junior Division Wheelchair Basketball National Championships, the NWBA has partnered with Sportable on a project we think you all should know about and replicate in your own communities. Today, you'll learn how one adaptive sports organization partnered with their state health department and national organization to customize global, evidence-based abuse prevention programming to include youth with disabilities and adaptive sports coaches. I am Matt Torres, Communications and Marketing Specialist for the NWBA National Office. Today, you'll be hearing from Laura Bennett, the Chief Operating Officer for Sportable, Derek Hoot, a professional wheelchair basketball player, youth basketball coach, and a consultant for Sportable, and Quillen Musgrave, a sexual violence prevention project contractor for Sportable. All right, guys, I've talked just enough. I'll let our host take it from here.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for everyone who's joining us here today. Just for a little bit more background about each of us, just to help you understand how we're connected to abuse prevention and to this project, and then I'll talk a little bit about Sportable. But first, I'm going to have Quillen just tell a little bit more about herself, and then Derek, and then I'll move into the next part.
Hi, everyone. We're glad you could join us today. My name is Quillen Musgrave, and I have spent several years working in the sexual and intimate partner violence prevention and intervention field, and I'm very grateful that I was brought on to be a part of the small team that was working to achieve the goals that we will talk about later in this project. And I think that's all you really need to know about me. Derek?
Hey everyone, I'm Derek Hoot. I am a wheelchair basketball coach and player here at Sportable, and I was also invited on to contract to help get this project off the ground and customize some of these materials for adaptive sports organizations.
Thanks, Derek. And as Matt said, my name is Laura Bennett. I have background in the community disability field for about 22 years, and I've worked for a few years with Quillen in the anti-violence space, and a lot of experience in policies, procedures, and managing grants, which is how we were able to work on this project. I just want to say thank you to Matt and to the NWBA for hosting us, and we're looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you in April in Richmond as we are partnering to host the Nationals April 5th through 7th for youth, for juniors, and April 12th through 14th. And we'll have a table there, and would love to talk, more to folks if they're interested in learning more about this project and how it's possible to replicate in your own organizations if you are interested. So just a little bit of housekeeping on our session agenda. Matt is taking care of the chat, so we'd love to take questions throughout. We'll also make time at the end for questions. We'd love to, if you're interested in just chatting your name and where you're from, and if you have any connection to abuse prevention work, we'd love to just hear, just see a little bit more about you. So please feel free to chat throughout, and we'll make time for that. So you can see the agenda. I'm not going to read it. This is what we're covering today, and it's a lot. So forgive us if we talk a little fast, but there's a lot to get through, and we want to share the meat of the conversation. And I'm just going to lay the groundwork along with Quillen, just so you understand how we got to the actual training and the pilot, which really involves the youth and the coach relationship, which is the center of this whole conversation. So I just want to say a little bit about Sportable, Richmond Adaptive Sports and Recreation. We've been around since 2005. We serve Central Virginians with physical disabilities and visual impairments. So we have 16 programs going on throughout the year with lots of events, lots of trainings going on. So we are really serving folks from 3 on to 87. And as part of our growing up in the past few years, we're really focusing on health and wellness in addition to continuing to provide competitive sport opportunities, but just looking more at serving the whole person. And this is how we've gotten into some of this abuse prevention work with the Department of Health. And the other thing I want to just harken back to is the title. As I mentioned, the moving beyond compliance and just checking boxes, a lot of us have at least some basic policies and procedures around abuse prevention when it comes to youth in particular, and there's some laws that we're all following, but Sportable is really interested in elevating our work to focus more on prevention rather than intervention. We want to be proactive. We want to get ahead of these issues, and we want the culture to change so that we know folks can tell us, if something's going on or if they've seen something, or even better, getting, protective factors in place and healthy relationships And the coach is in such a unique position to be a natural mentor. It's a natural relationship in our youth athletes' lives, and the evidence is very strong that the influence the coach has on youth in particular is very strong. So we're really grateful that we have these incredible coaches like Derek and some others that we'll mention throughout the presentation today who have taken on this more than just coach. They're mentoring, and they're playing an extremely important role in abuse prevention. So that's a little bit of the background about this. I think when people ask us about this project, they wonder how did you have the time and the resources to do this? Because like many of you, I would imagine you're working with a small staff, a small team, and limited resources. I was fortunate enough to come to Sportable a couple of years ago with an existing relationship with the Virginia Department of Health, and they reached out to me wondering, how could we continue our partnership? Because before that, we partnered on screening people in domestic violence services for brain injuries. So we started talking, and what they really wanted us to focus on was this program called Coaching Boys into Men, which focuses on young men. It's very binary in the way that it is now. We'll talk more about gender later. And then Athletes as Leaders, which is focused on young female athletes. The issue with this, the Coaching Boys into Men and Athletes as Leaders, is that, yes, it's evidence-based, it's well-vetted, well-funded, and there's, again, the problem is, like with everything that we're used to seeing, is people with disabilities are left out of these conversations. So this curricula, which is focused on youth athletes, a lot of high schools use it, a lot of colleges. People with disabilities were just left out of the conversation. There was nothing about it in the curricula. So what VDH, Department of Health, asked us to do was to adapt it, which adaptation is what we're great at. It's in our name. So we decided that we would work through that, and as the baseline for that, we had to get our policies and procedures in order, which was a massive undertaking, and it also involved a lot of culture change and surveying all of our stakeholders, which we'll get into in a little bit. Once we began the work, which we began with Quillen, and we felt it was incredibly important that the work was done with people lived experiences. We contracted with Derek. I believe Mandy is on the call with us today. She is another one of our star athletes. And we contracted with other athletes who lived experiences and coaches. And we also had a prevention team, which is made up of stakeholders, of volunteers, family members, athletes, community partners, advising us along the way so that Quill and I weren't just creating this program in a vacuum. Far from it, it was completely a community effort. So as we started moving through that, what we realized is that there were other smaller organizations who were serving the same people who needed help. They didn't know where to start with their abuse prevention work. They didn't necessarily know what even the baseline requirements are for example, for Child Protective Services. Virginia has very specific laws, and they didn't know how to tackle it on their own. So we moved into providing training and technical assistance to organizations, and we branched out. So Sportable is serving people with physical disabilities and visual impairments, though we also serve people with brain injuries. So we hadn't really crossed over into cognitive disability, development disability space, but our partners are doing that work, and those folks are even more at risk for abuse. So we brought a small group of organizations serving people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and we began to do the work together of identifying gaps in their policies and training, identifying cultural issues like, does someone know where to report? If they reported to you, would they even feel that you would take that seriously? So collecting data from stakeholders, then working on policies and procedures and training, which is a critical component of this work that we've done. So I think the next piece of that is just looking at our short-term goals. Just as I said, we were adapting this curricula for adaptive sports, so that youth with disabilities were included in this existing curricula, which is, again, Coaching Boys into Men and Athletes as Leaders. then again, looking at our gaps and building these partnerships. Those were our short-term goals. Our long-term goals, and that continue to exist because we will continue to have funding through the Department of Health in a third year of this project, is really just replicating this work across Virginia, continuing our technical assistance, building a culture of abuse prevention, and ensuring that our youth have the tools that they need to enjoy healthy relationships across their lifespan. And again, this long-term goal of culture change, which has been a really significant benefit of this work. So I'm going to turn it over to Quillen. She was the primary contractor on this entire project, and she will talk about a bit about our methodology and our processes before we get into how we piloted the curricula.
Great, thank you, Laura. And I'm also probably going to move quickly because, like we mentioned earlier, we really wanted to leave a large amount of time for Derek and possibly Mandy, if Mandy's still on and wants to chime in to talk about how we rolled out the actual pilot of the curricula. So yes, Gantt charts were involved. We had to organize a lot of moving pieces that Laura kind of just went over very briefly. So we used a lot of different tools to get going with the work. But yeah, that is our actual initial Gantt chart, a chunk of it. It's not the whole thing, obviously, that we just kind of utilized to move forward. One of the things that we needed to know before we could get started was where are we as Sportable? So we conducted a really large survey of all these stakeholder groups to gauge the organizational culture. We wanted to ask about people's knowledge of policies, people's understanding of how to intervene or respond if situations arise that folks felt uncomfortable with, whether it was harassment or violence or abuse or anything that they needed the help of Sportable or an external person to process. We looked at the board, we looked at volunteers, we looked at coaches, athletes, everybody was asked. And we got I think we had a really robust participation in our initial surveys. We received a lot of information. And then any area that was kind of had any gray area at all, we took that and then we did individual interviews with groups of stakeholders as well to just really drill down on things that weren't left very clear as a result of the survey. And that gave us a really crucial understanding to what our potential barriers might be as we began to roll out the work and move forward. We kind of needed to know how far along were some of the people who were already in the organization, and then what were the big red flags that were showing up that we knew we might need to address as the work continued to build. And we have all of these materials that we are compiling different versions of that we are going to make available after the presentation, so people can see the tools we used and get a better understanding of how you can kind of implement this from step one all the way to the future zone of this work if anybody's interested in doing that. We're making everything available. Oh, sorry, does the mouse work? Okay. Okay, so once we heard from the individual people and got all that information together, we also developed a interview report and a survey report that we made available to the leadership here at Sportable and to our funder, because every step of the way as far as this process was concerned, I think we were aiming for like maximum transparency and accountability. So we shared the data with the prevention team that Laura mentioned. We shared it with the leadership here and with our funder, so that at any point in this process, someone could have stepped in and redirected if needed, or provided us with any additional information or resources along the way. Luckily, I don't think anybody had to bumper us back on track. I think we were able to stay pretty focused, which is remarkable. So the next part was the gap analysis. One of the big things that I think folks do when we get funding to do specific work is just kind of jump in and do the work without really taking the time to get a lay of the land. And that was really important to make sure we had a good feel on what we needed, where the organization was, where we wanted to go, and then how to get there. So that's what we called the current state, the future state, and then the roadmap for how to get there. And we did that by identifying places of concern, things that needed significant attention right away, things that Sportable was on the right track, but might be needed some minor adjustments, and then areas where Sportable was doing really great work and can just carry on as they were already doing. And one of the things that was, I think, really essential was this International Safeguards for Children in Sport has a self-audit that they have compiled that walked you through programming, through policies, through procedures, organizational culture questions. You know, it was a really eye-opening experience to go through the self-audit and really see, where Sportable is as far as organizational development goes in this content area. So I would highly recommend that tool as a basic starting point for anyone who is interested in having these conversations. We leaned really heavily on the map and the work that Safe Sport has been doing. All those policies that are in the map are really, really, really helpful. If you don't know where to start and would like to see something for reference, those are really great tools. And oddly, we found Sport New Zealand, which has a robust website of kind of like youth-centered policies and procedures that were, I thought, really progressive and really well written and also easily understandable. So that was another area of sample policies and materials that we pulled from as we were kind of doing the gap analysis of seeing where Sportable is and then what opportunities were already out there that we could learn from and utilize right away. We shared the gap analysis report, again, with Sportable leadership and with the prevention team and our funders to maintain that accountability and transparency through the process. I would not recommend like skipping over that step. It sounds like something you would just want to skip over, but much like this step of reviewing all the policies and materials, it really is instrumental in knowing what you have and what you need to work on. We looked at every single existing Sportable policy. Anywhere there might possibly be a reference to safeguarding or abuse prevention or codes of conduct, anything like that. We pulled every training element that the staff uses to train volunteers and coaches to just try to find any opportunities that could be enhanced to include really direct recommendations for violence and abuse prevention and intervention work. The policies are often a collection of paperwork that sits on the shelf. We understand that, but policies also are tools that are used to guide organizational culture. And so one of the things we were looking at in all the policies too was how can you incorporate the beliefs and the practices of an organization while you're trying to shift the beliefs and practices of an organization. So we needed to know what was there so that we could make sure that practices about talking about abuse prevention could become the norm in Sportable's culture. We know it can feel very tedious to do that work, but again, it's very necessary to just understand where you are and where you need to go. And we have like spreadsheets where it was like, we knew we needed this kind of policy. Do we have this policy? Is this policy somewhere that we can massage into a better version of this policy? So we were just constantly tracking and identifying work that we knew we needed to do. And again, the transparency piece was really important, taking it to the leadership, talking about what we needed to develop, and then making a plan for how to move forward with that. The prevention team, Laura mentioned that earlier. This was one of those things, I don't know how many of you have been on like work groups where you feel like you're just on a work group to check a box that a grant was like, you need to have a work group to process this thing. In the beginning, we were like, oh no, we need to have a work group. This prevention team was an incredible and completely invaluable resource to this project. They were so invested, provided amazing feedback. We would draft curriculum pieces and then actually go to the prevention team, and they would act like they were the youth athletes, and we would deliver the material, and they would pretend like they were teenagers, and we would go back and forth and kind of massage the work along the way. Every single meeting of the prevention team, I feel like we learned something new or got to highlight something. It was such a dynamic and really awesome practice. It made me change my mind about work groups forever, because this is the best work group thing I've ever been a part of. And I don't know if it was because it was folks who actually had a shared interest. They weren't no one's boss like assigned them to just come to this. It was people who were invited, who wanted to participate, and have a vested interest in making sure that this work is successful. So it felt really awesome. And we had leaders from Partner Adaptive Sports Organization, members of the Sportable community, some project staff, local domestic or sexual violence program staff. It was Parks and Rec was there. It was a really cool, diverse group of players who came along. And I highly recommend, if you're going to do this work, to not do it in a bubble, because the feedback and support that we received from that team along the whole process was really critical to the success that I think we've experienced. But it sounds like that would be like the first thing. You would be like, oh, no work group. But really, very important. All right, and then let's see. The final thing that we did to get ready was look at these curricula. Athletes as Leaders in Coaching Boys into Men. We put the websites where both of these exist. Even if you just started reading today, like 6 months from now, you will still be reading material that is on these websites related to these curricula. There is so much at each of these websites about the material. This is the material that was developed by the federal agencies. Futures Without Violence financially supported the development of both of these programs. And these programs have been used around the world, leveraging that coach-athlete relationship that Laura mentioned earlier. You can also find other webinars that these folks have put together to familiarize yourself with the materials. And they schedule, I don't know if it's quarterly or a few times a year, there's regular live facilitated conversations about these curricula that they host, that you can hop on, learn more about it, ask questions, etc. They were very, very helpful throughout this process and in getting the information that we need. But those are the two curricula Laura mentioned and that we worked from, and the two websites that have the basic initial versions of those materials. All right, so what we did, here's our team, and there's some coaches back there. I asked permission to use them.
Yes.
All right, so again, these programs were developed to provide opportunities for high school athletes in gender-separated groups, and they were specifically developed to have these youth develop skills and have hard conversations around things like healthy relationships, consent, how to intervene when you witness abuse, like if your friend is being icky to somebody, how do you say something? So bystander intervention is what we call that strategy. Again, leveraging that coach relationship that data shows is really important for young athletes. These programs have been implemented successfully all across the globe, but we believe we're the first of our kind, the first to have the program be adapted specifically for youth with an adaptive sports environment. We worked with a much smaller team, so that included Derek and Mandy, who we mentioned earlier, who helped us reframe the whole way we thought about the curriculum through an adaptive sports lens. So instead of like looking at language or let's find a scenario where the athlete has a disability, Derek really developed like whole actual training pieces that were very specific to the experiences of youth with disabilities. So I think it made the program, being able to talk to Mandy and Derek and the prevention team, helped us really make something that I think ended up being very meaningful and very relevant to the youth involved. Yeah. And we're going to keep making new iterations as we keep learning and learning and learning. Let's see. We landed on wheelchair basketball as our pilot sport, which was pretty awesome considering Derek was one of the wheelchair basketball coaches. So I'm glad it worked out that we ended up with his sport. And when we did that, we learned a lot through this process. We learned that wheelchair basketball at this level is often not gender separated, that the kids all play together. We learned that the age range can be anything from like 8 to 17. Something, you know, it could be all those kids at one team at any given moment. And so we really had to get creative on the fly at times about how we were going to engage all these kids in the parameters of these two curricula we were assigned to be working with. And you'll learn about how we did that as we move forward in the presentation. I think we're good. We can just skip the rest of what I was going to say, because.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I think this is the meat. Yeah, we're vegetarian, so I know we're going to go with the tofu and potatoes with Derek.
All right. Well, thank you, Quillen. Like Quillen said, I was invited on board to help put together some of the programming that would be specific to our needs at Sportable as an adaptive sports organization, and kind of leverage my experience as a youth coach in order to provide some more of that perspective. So the first order of business was to comb over the initial training materials, which are divided into cards. So you have the option to reorder the different topics and scenarios that you want to cover as necessary. And the cards are divided into training cards, teachable moment cards, and what are called timeouts. So the training cards provide the kids with a broad overview of a topic. It has the coaches ask the team questions about how they might encounter these topics in their daily lives, whether that's at school or in the community or as an athlete, as a part of a team. And then there's teachable moment cards, which give the team specific scenarios that they might encounter, and it asks them to respond or react to those situations. So it gives the kids an opportunity to practice addressing different sets of circumstances that could be related to abuse or bullying. And then the timeout cards give them the opportunity just to step back and reflect on what they've learned so far as a part of the course. So it's more of a review type card. So once we were familiar with all the standard content and with the format of the standard content, I went through and identified some potential gaps in the programming, or rather places where we could address those disability-specific challenges that the kids might face in an athletic or an adaptive athletics world. So that could be establishing boundaries of volunteers surrounding things like chair transfers. That could be just being mindful of anxiety that your young athletes in a prep or junior level might have with upcoming surgeries. Respecting differences on on-court functionality. I know we all have the classification system, and just recognizing that we all play different roles and have different strengths as adaptive athletes. Even things like addressing bathroom challenges in a mature way and in a safe way. Those are all topics that we covered that were specific to athletes with disabilities that might not otherwise be communicated to them by a standard Coaching Boys into Men program. And so we wanted to make sure that we built it into the curriculum and that it felt like an actual adaptive athletics course. And of course, the standard cards, they covered important topics. So we wanted to keep a lot of them. We also combined some of them, but we wanted to make sure that we included topics that were important regardless of ability. So things like respecting female teammates and classmates, being responsible on social media, and not tolerating disrespect within your community or within your team, whether that's related to disability or gender or sexual orientation or anything like that. Should I jump into some of the logistics?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so we were lucky enough to practice at a community center. So the community center actually had classroom spaces in addition to a gym space. So what we ended up doing was dividing up into athletes as leaders and Coaching Boys into Men. So right when athletes came in the door, they would go to their classrooms. So, the 3 or 4 boys that were doing Coaching Boys into Men would go into their classroom. The girls who were doing the athletes as leaders would go into that classroom. And then the age down version, we had an age down version that covered the same concepts like mutual respect and respecting boundaries and preventing bullying, but without a focus on the aged up topics like romantic consent or relationship abuse. That part of our program was in the gym. And so we had these 3 different courses going on at the same time. And just to talk a little bit about the actual course itself and who participated and how it went. So we had 3 of our male middle to high school athletes join the Coaching Boys into Men's sessions. So while it was a relatively small group, they were all able to share their thoughts on each topic as we covered it, share with each other, and they were pretty open with each other about how they related to the various topics. So of course, with 3 participants, there were days when 1 or 2 of them were late, in which case we had a session with only 1 or 2 players. But you know, that being less than ideal, even in those smaller sessions, we had a good discussion. And the reason being late would potentially result in you missing the session was because these were 10-minute sessions at the beginning of practice. So we would go into the classroom for 10 minutes, and then after those 10-minute sessions were up, whether we discussed a scenario or one of the overview cards, we would then go right onto the court and practice. And so the reason we adapted it to be that length is because, of course, being a wheelchair basketball program, we don't practice every day for a junior team at least. And so having a 1 practice a week, 1 night a week, we shortened the sessions to be that 10-minute duration. And then there were also a lot of concepts that were covered by both Coaching Boys into Men and Athletes as Leaders. So for those lessons, we wanted to have a combined session. And that was helpful just because the general lack of numbers in the separated programs. And we also wanted to get a sense of what a co-ed session would look like. And I would just say, if you do have the chance, if you are running both Athletes as Leaders and Coaching Boys to Men as part of your adaptive sports program, I would recommend combined sessions like these, just because whenever you possibly can have a larger group discussion, it's always more fruitful. And I think Quillen has some survey to share.
And before we move on, I just want to give a shout out to the people in that picture. So you can see Derek was one of the coaches, and next to him is Tyler Rowe on our staff, who is one of our senior program coordinators, and he actually created the H-Down version. That was a really amazing program that we were able to offer for our pilot, but also for our summer camp. And then Megan Anderson is one of our coaches, and she led the Athletes as Leaders. It was really important to, again, we'll talk about gender, but in terms of binary, it was important to have a female coach for Athletes as Leaders. And then Brandon Rush, who is one of our coaches and athletes, who is also instrumental in this program. So I just wanted to acknowledge them. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so Derek, like I said, went over briefly like the logistics and how we made the whole thing happen. And we, like I said, we learned a lot along the way. I think when we started the program, you would have like one vision for the work, and then the more we learned, the more we were able to tweak and change up until like the week before we were starting the thing. We were still tweaking and changing and figuring out what it was going to look like. And that, I think that's okay, because prevention work is all about learning what works for your community. And just like, I think Laura mentioned the term protective factors earlier. And as long as we can just keep elevating those protective factors for the young people involved, you're doing good work. So we surveyed the participants pre and post implementation of the curriculum. We were hoping to measure change in knowledge, attitude, beliefs, and behavior. Since this is an evidence-based program that was adapted for our audience, we had hopes to receive a lot more quantitative data, but again, the sample size was small, and there's evidence that some of the participants had difficulty understanding the breadth of the survey, and many of the questions were geared toward a slightly older population who might have already had different life experiences as just from being 16, 17 years old. And one of the things that we didn't do was revise those initial surveys too terribly much. But one of the things we learned is that for the next iteration, we are going to revise the survey tools to meet the specific goals of our adapted curriculum and make sure we're meeting the youth where they are at developmentally. So that was one of the the challenges, I think, was just using that tool right out of the box didn't quite give us the data that we needed. Derek's going to give some anecdotal evidence here in a minute, which I found very, very helpful in understanding where we can take this moving forward. We did survey the younger participants who did the age down version. And from those surveys and from hearing from Tyler, we learned that they were engaged during the session and they did receive the information on the broad concepts that were shared with them. And it like the summer camp version that we did last summer, coupled with the information we gathered through the age down version at the wheelchair basketball pilot, let us know that including the younger audiences is helpful and important. They did experiential activities and had some brief conversations about the concepts. And instead of just writing off any young athletes you might have in your program, and these are like 12 and younger, that we have ways that you can engage with these concepts with that age group and make it meaningful for them. And starting at any time is good. It's good for the youth to be able to have these conversations no matter how young they are. The anecdotal evidence provided by all the coaches, we were able to interview all the coaches after the programming. Again, helped affirm the positive impact that this work had on the youth who participated in the pilot sessions. And Derek, could you briefly share some of what you saw and heard from the athletes on the team?
Yeah, so we had a lot of productive discussion about some important topics that we covered together, and a lot of them shared that in some way they did feel like representatives of the disability community in their school, and more specifically of wheelchair sports, because a lot of them are the only student with a disability at their school. And even if they're not, they might be the only athlete with a disability at their school. And so that was something that I was proud to hear as a coach, because we do want them to feel that sense of responsibility that they represent wheelchair basketball, or if they're participating in a lot of different sports at Sportable, we want them to feel like they're representing wheelchair sports well, or the disability community well. And I also got a sense that when we were doing reflections or asking some of the group questions, that they were really thinking critically about some of these scenarios, and that they do take a lot of these topics seriously, regardless of whether they're in middle or high school, or whether they've encountered these scenarios in their real life before. So I think after the first couple sessions, once they get out of their shell a little bit, I would really anticipate that really most NWBA junior athletes would really benefit from this kind of thing. And I even think, even if they're getting abuse prevention programming, even if they're getting anti-bullying or anti-harassment courses in school, it's really important not to just have a course like this that elevates disability as part of the conversation, even separate from what they're getting in school, but this allows them to have a place to talk about it where they don't feel singled out. When they're talking about disability and how it affects their lives in a course like this, they don't have to have the whole classroom turn around and look at them, because everybody in this conversation, including their coach who's giving the curriculum, has a disability. The other thing I would say is I would just be ready to provide immediate, unambiguous feedback on a situation. So like I said, the boys on the team were very open once we got rolling with the curriculum. Just one example, one of our players, not going to say who it is, one of our players said he got in a fight with a kid at summer camp because the kid called him a cripple, quote unquote, right? So obviously, that's a situation that we want to provide feedback on and say, we want to, of course, encourage our kids not to use violence, right? Not to get in physical altercations, but also let our player know that it's not okay what that other kid said to him, and that he needs to be comfortable either reporting that right away to an adult so that they can know that that situation happened, or, if he feels comfortable letting that individual know that that's not okay to ever say to him again. If you think that that person said that word out of ignorance, right? So the goal here is to really listen to real life situations if they come up, and then provide tools for your players to handle some of these situations in the future, and then just give them the sense of responsibility, because in this aged up version that we were doing, you know, these are the older kids on our team. They're either the leaders on our prep team, or they are members of our varsity team. So just instill them with that sense of responsibility and leadership, saying, you know, you guys are pillars of our team, and we know that you'll go out there when we get to practice and represent well, and you know, demand a lot from your teammates in terms of mutual respect and making sure that you're preventing bullying and abuse wherever you see it. You know, and that even extends beyond practice and beyond sports to the classroom and life. So we were really happy with what we heard from our athletes. We were glad to see them thinking about these things and being comfortable talking about these things. So overall, it was a really cool experience for me as a coach to have those interactions with them, and I hope that they found it as fruitful as I did.
Well, I can just add on to that a statement that was made to me that was so impactful as a young athlete who'd grown up at Sportable. She was part of our prevention team, and she'd also had conversations with us throughout the process, but she shared with me that the pieces about consent, she wished so much that she had heard that as a young athlete at an age where it would have really impacted the rest of her life, that it's okay to volunteers coming over to you to transfer, they need to ask for consent, and that she was empowered to do that. You know, she talks about hands-on people with disabilities all the time, the intrusive nature of just everyone just thinking they can put their hands on their bodies. That she had said, I wish desperately that I'd had this information as a young athlete. So a lot of gratitude goes out to Derek and Tyler and Mandy and Megan for all the work that they did to customize this, because it really has made an impact. And we know that the seeds are just being planted and growing out. So back to the boring stuff. So policies, procedures, and trainings. I will say working on the policies and procedures for me was incredibly difficult. We ran into a lot of what ifs, rabbit holes. There's a lot about our mission that is, it is all community. So when we talk about, okay, there's a 14-year-old who wants to text someone on our staff that's like a brother to her who's an adult, and she's like, you know, hey, Dan, I had a great game. Like, do you want to get ice cream, like, or something? Like that, we have to address these communication policies, and that, okay, the athlete's 14, you have to include a parent on that text. So that's the granular work that we were doing, is getting into scenarios, talking about changing and transportation and bathroom situations and one-on-one interactions. I mean, we went through so many scenarios. And I know this is an evergreen document. We're going to constantly have to just be working on it. It has to be living and breathing. And it's even more challenging when you talk about athletes and program participants with cognitive disabilities. So the work is hard, but we have a lot of resources that we can share with people. And what we moved from is like consent as the baseline. So anything that was contrary to that, then we needed to change that policy. So we did, as we said, we ended up with a brand new policy manual and an abuse prevention handbook, which was a lot of work. And we changed our code of conduct. We changed our volunteer training. We have a page on our website that talks about the mandatory pieces. We've done a really good job now of tracking compliance. So if we have volunteers whose criminal background checks are more than 2 years old, we have a system now. They're not permitted to be in programs with youth. One of the tougher things that we've implemented is we have program spaces with adults and youth. So we have our adult athletes who are in any space with youth athletes, like, for example, rock climbing. They have to go through a criminal background check. And, you know, that's been a culture change and a shift in a lot of explaining why, but we've found that when we explain the reasons why we're doing certain things, that most people are understanding and willing to be part of our prevention work. So we will have a lot of changes coming up in our volunteer handbook, and we have a coaches training coming up. So we'll be in one space to to work on that together. The other piece that was really important was to be very transparent and public about having a place for people to report any concerns. So we have an outward-facing forum on our website that they know there's someone to go to. And then Shelley and her team created this great little pocket-sized resource that has information about who to report to in Sportable. So it has my name, Tyler's name, it has one of our female athletes' name, and then it gives crisis resources in case someone was in crisis, like the suicide hotline and local domestic and sexual violence programs. And it's very discreet in case someone just needs to like put in their pocket. But we wanted to be able to provide resources because, you know, we're not trained in crisis counseling on our staff, but we want people to have the resources and also to know that we take them seriously when they're sharing information with us. So we, again, just to talk about some of our partners at the local, state, and national level, to shout out again to Beyond Boundaries and Jacob's Chance, which are Richmond programs that have been part of our technical assistance work. Department of Health has funded our work and will continue to fund our work. And then again, Futures Without Violence, who created the original programming and has been gracious to let us customize and are really supportive of sharing that work out with the entire country, because they have confirmed that we're the first people who have modified coaching boys into men and athletes as leaders to include youth with disabilities. So it's pretty groundbreaking. The other piece that I wanted to mention, a partner that Quillen actually found, Google, amazing, in Boston, is an organization called Impact Boston, and they are one of the few people who have a curriculum called ASAP, and it's Adaptive Sports Abuse Prevention. And their training is focused on staff, volunteers, coaches, whereas coaching boys into men and athletes as leaders is directed at the athletes and the coaches. So our staff and a bunch of community partners in Richmond recently just took a 2-day training with Impact, this ASAP training, and it was a train-the-trainer model. So half of our staff now is certified to train other people who are interested in, it's very specific on adaptive sports. So we are now trained to give that training to other people who are interested. We're going to shorten it and customize it, but that'll be something that we'll be sharing out with our partners too, just to continue to spread the word and get more people in our communities on board with this prevention work. So quickly before we get to questions and wrapping up, our future, we're lucky to have continued funding with the Department of Health, which I would encourage people who are interested in funding any work like this, look at your Department of Health, look at your maybe Department of Social Services. You can look at foundations and grants, but especially now looking at well-being and mental health is getting a lot of attention and funding. If you frame it within that, you might have more success getting it funded. But the Department of Health sees it as in the public health space, prevention, and then injury and violence prevention. So I would encourage people to reach out to those partners because we were very, very fortunate to be able to fund this work so we could actually really give it the attention that it deserved. The next iteration of the pilot, as Derek and Quillen talked about, we have smaller numbers, less opportunity to split by gender, and also we want to be inclusive of all genders. So we already are serving several non-binary folks who don't want to be don't identify as male or female, and we want spaces for them. So the next iteration is we're going to take coaching boys into men, athletes as leaders, and mush it all together and make it gender inclusive. And we still want to have space for genders to, there are topics that I have girls. I'm going to talk about girls, that my girls wouldn't feel comfortable saying in front of boys. And we want to leave some pockets of space for separation there. But what's really important and challenging is for boys, girls, and every gender to have these difficult conversations together, because a lot of time, I'm just going to pick on boys, I'm sorry, typically, we know why, but boys don't hear or understand what other genders are saying to them about, oh, you play like a girl, or some other demeaning comment, or standing over, if they're able, by they're standing over you, like, or a comment that you make, like the impact of that. So there's a lot of education and light bulbs that can go off when hard conversations happen together. So to normalize that even within the genders, instead of like, oh, the girls are talking about girl stuff.
Right.
So bringing that together, and we'll measure it. We'll see how this works.
Yeah.
We'll do better evaluations this time.
Yeah.
We learned so much. So expanding the reach of technical assistance, we are starting to work, like I said, more in the developmental disability community. We have some ARCs who will be partnering with us. Parks and Rec are very interested in the work that we're doing because obviously they have therapeutic rec programs and they're serving the same people we are, and we should not be recreating the wheel. And we find a lot of the peer support the most valuable part of all of this, and running scenarios by each other. So that prevention team and that technical assistance will absolutely continue. Another important component of all of this work is developing leaders among our athletes. So we have champions who are carrying this work forward, and they're excited about it. And that's exciting for us to watch. So we're building next generation leaders, as some of us, not you, Derek, but some of us are getting old. So, and then just training more coaches to carry on this work. Again, we'll expand training within even our own community, and going outside of basketball, probably CP soccer will be our next program. And then we just want to continue to share and spread the message. And as Quillen said, as we wrap up our work, we'll be able to share a lot of these resources with other folks, because we just want to see it continue to grow. So we talked a lot. Would love to answer any questions and engage in any conversations that we can have in the next 5 minutes.
And you can, they can unmute, right?
Yeah,
you can unmute, or you can
chat, whatever.
Type it, whatever you.
Anyone have any questions or comments about all of the information that we gave to you today?
Hey guys, it's Desi Miller. I'm an assistant coach for Team USA. I popped on today purely out of curiosity. I've known Derek for a long time. I respect him and all the things that he's doing. And I just want to say quickly that this work is super important. I'm glad that there's passion and intention around this, and I hope it bleeds into other programs out there, because I think it's crucial for the development of our athletes. So thank you for everything that y'all are doing.
Thank you. Good to hear. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I know it's a lot. I will say the one other challenge, and we have materials that we can share, is we did get a little bit of pushback from some of the parents who didn't quite understand what we were doing, and they, some of them just didn't read the communications. We did a Dear Parent letter, and we included lots of information. But looking back at it, we also had an in-person conversation. Looking back, we would have had FAQs ready, and we would have been more insistent on having a conversation and that they read the materials, because some of them even said, if I knew what this was really about, I would have been more supportive, and I would have opted in, because some of the kids were opted into a younger version of the program where they really would have benefited from the more advanced program. So just communicating, we learned a lot about communicating with parents. But I would say overall, everyone, parents, coaches, athletes, has been incredibly supportive, and it bodes well for our whole community as we work together to do this. So communication was a big thing. So if there's anything else to add, Tyler, do you have anything to add? Not to put you on the spot, but you were a big part of this, and Mandy was a big part of this, and I don't know who else is on, but if you have anything to add, if not, then
there's some chat things.
Oh, is there a chat? Oh, it's just that. Yeah, if you don't mind filling out an evaluation, as we talk about program evaluation and funders, all that good stuff, we would love to know what could be improved. But other than that, if there's nothing else, then I just thank you, Matt, thank you to the NWBA, thank you for everyone who participated today, and thank you to Derek and Quillen.